Baby, wouldn't it be nice if we both spoke the same language? I could understand your troubles and you know mine, and we could be together all the time if we both spoke the same language. Baby, no sería lindo si nos dos habláramos la misma lengua. Podría entender tus problemas y sabrías los míos.
Hello and welcome to Whoever You Thought You Were, You're a Jew. We're up to episode 9, I think it is. Episode 9, and today's episode is entitled The Relationship Between God and Enlightenment. In the past episodes, if you've been watching, we've gone to a lot of trouble to try to show the relationship between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I'm not sure I've really got the point across. Hopefully, people have found some value in these discussions. Today we're going to discuss a different matter, which is the relationship between the East and West. Now, here in the West, we talk about God. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all believe in God. God is a being. He's like us. He's almost like a person in most people's minds. Now, in the Orient, for the most part, people say there is no God. But they say there's this thing called enlightenment. Now, what is enlightenment? Well, just as here in the West we say that God can't really be defined, similarly, in the East they say that enlightenment can't be defined either. It's something which is beyond words, beyond description, and utterly beyond human understanding. And furthermore, when you read about it, you find out that enlightenment is a good thing. Just as our God in the West is a compassionate God, it's a very good thing to attain enlightenment. In fact, it's better than anything else. In fact, to those who believe in enlightenment, there really isn't anything else of value, and the whole of existence is a continuous striving until we attain enlightenment. It is the ultimate reality. Well, what's the relationship between God and enlightenment? Are there two ultimate realities? Or maybe one of them is false, and if so, which one? Or maybe both of them are false. How are we going to figure that out? Interestingly enough, it never really bothered me, and yet I had to think about it for about 5 years before the answer came to me. And I think the answer is important, and I want to share it with you, and that's what I want to discuss with you today. Now, in order to discuss the relationship between God and enlightenment, you have to understand something about Eastern religion. And the only Eastern religion I'm going to talk about today is Buddhism. There are several others which have similar beliefs, or at least similar from the Western point of view. Well, I know the Hindus and Buddhists are trying to kill each other in India or Sri Lanka. There's Hinduism, there's Buddhism, there's Jainism, there's Taoism, and there are other smaller religions. They all have one thing in common. They believe in a thing called enlightenment. And we want to know what the relationship is between God and enlightenment. My own understanding of Buddhism began about 10 years ago when I went to Japan. And I saw this wonderful book, which I'm going to show to you. It's called The Teaching of Buddha. And I got it in my hotel room in Kyoto. I realized that the book had been placed in every hotel room, similar to here in the West. We have a Gideon's Bible in every hotel room. And yet, I wanted that book very badly. I had no intention of leaving Japan without it. And I was afraid to ask them if it was available, because I was afraid they might say no. So I stole it. I felt kind of bad about that, but when I called the publisher, they told me it was free anyway. So I sent them a large donation. Well, large, not Rockefellerian. This is the organization that publishes this book. It's called the Society for Buddhist Understanding. and they're in the City of Industry, California, you can call them at 818-369-5035, and they'll send you this book for free. They would appreciate a donation, but it's not necessary. This book is available for nothing, and it's a wonderful book. By the way, I'll be showing that address and phone number again at the end of the show if you didn't have time to write it down. Now, the basic fact about Buddhism, which must be understood in order to understand the relationship between God and enlightenment, is that the entire thrust of Buddhism, which is, of course, to attain enlightenment, the entire thrust of Buddhism is to remove worldly desire. And before I get into talking about that, this is the passage. It's from the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verses 6 to 7. And it's the story of the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they're expelled from paradise. This is the origin of the world, according to Jews, Christians, and Muslims who believe in God and believe in the Bible. Now, if you don't believe in this story, then none of the rest of the things I say today are going to make any sense to you. You don't have to believe the story as literal history. You can believe it as parable. But this is the basis of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Now, this is what happened when Eve saw this tree and was tempted by the serpent, who most people presume is the devil. This is what it says. And when Eve saw that the tree was good for food and a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat. And she gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And the rest, as they say, is history. Now let's look at this again, because the importance of this passage cannot be overemphasized. Eve saw that the tree was good for food. So what was it that Eve sought in this tree? Well, food tastes good, it's pleasant to the senses. The tree was also a delight to the eye. Again, pleasant to the senses. She wanted to taste good food. She wanted to see pretty sights. One can presume that she wanted to hear sweet sounds. Furthermore, it says that the tree was to be desired, to make one wise. Now there's a Hebrew prayer which goes, Reishis Chochma Yiras Adonai. The beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. So in other words, wisdom has something to do with learning to know about God. Well, this wisdom here that Eve desired to become wise, this isn't knowledge of God, because Adam and Eve were in the presence of God. They didn't need to become wise about God. This was worldly wisdom. Learning how to navigate through the world, to make more money, to get more sex, to get better food, to see nicer sights with your eyes. That's the sort of wisdom that this is. This is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, not knowledge of God. And all religions teach that developing a relationship with God is the point, not developing a relationship with the world. Now look at this word desired. The object of the Buddhist religion, which we're going to talk about in a moment, is to remove desire. So the question you could ask yourself right now was, did Eve buy into, so to speak, did she buy into a life of worldly desire by eating from that tree? Because when you think about it, you'll realize eventually that this is the link between Judaism and between Buddhism. Now I know that most of you don't speak Hebrew, but it's so important that the meanings of these words be understood that I'm going to run through the Hebrew quickly anyway. Remember, the Bible was originally written in Hebrew. Vatera ha'isha means, and saw the woman, that is, the woman saw, that is, Eve saw. Ki tov ha'etz lama'achal, that was good the tree for food. In other words, that the tree was good for food. V'chisa avohu la'einayim, which means, Hebrew's word order is different from ours, and it was desirable to the eyes. Sa'avor means desirable. And I want you to know what that word means and what its root is. So here it is. Ta'avo, it's a noun. It means a thing desirable, that is, to the senses. It comes from the verb ava, which means to desire eagerly or to covet. Now let's look at the next line of our biblical verse. Next line says, V'nechmad ha'etz lahaskil. The tree was desirable for wisdom. That word now is v'nechmad. And let's look at the etymology of that. Nechmad is a verb, to be desirable, costly, precious. It comes from the verb chamad, which means to desire or to covet. So I think you could see that there was something about Eve's desire for what that tree had to offer, a desire which she passed on to her husband, which was a very worldly sort of desire, something which was not entirely respectable. The word covet is not something that somebody wants to admit that they do. There was something wrong about that desire. Now let's talk a little bit about Buddhism. Buddha taught that people were subject to the lure of worldly desire, and that was the cause of the evil in their lives. As it's taught in the Bible, so did Buddha teach that man was once better off than he is now, and that there was something like a fall from grace. Although they don't dwell on that. They're mainly concerned with getting back. And the method of getting back involves the complete removal of worldly desire, which is equivalent to attaining what they call enlightenment. Now, the removal of worldly desire is a very difficult thing for the Western mind to comprehend. We're talking about desire for money, for success, for fame, for food, for sex, warmth, comfort, all the things that people want. We're supposed to remove our desire for that? What does that mean? The Westerner wonders. What does it mean? Does that mean that I have to starve? That I can't have a house? It's not easy to explain what it means. The best way that one can look at it, the easiest way to look at it, is to think of it this way. If a person needs to eat to live and you eat, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you desire to have better food than everyone else, and say, for example, you're willing to steal to get it, or some people will even kill to get better food than everyone else. If you go that far, then you have a desire for food which vastly exceeds the needs of your body. That's the only way I can explain it. I'm not sure I 100% understand it myself. How about money? Right now, the way the world is, unfortunately, you got to do some kind of a deal with this guy. Although the scriptures say it's not going to be that way forever. But it's surely that way now. A man needs money to buy food to eat. So is it wrong to have money? No, it's not wrong. I guess it depends on what you do with it. But if you go out and steal it and make someone else poor so that you can be better off, then there's something wrong. And if you kill for it, there's something very wrong. Buddha teaches that the world is a place of suffering. You may not like that idea, but if you think about it, you'll see there's a lot of substance to it. Certainly birth is suffering, and if you don't believe it was suffering for you, you can certainly believe it was suffering for your mother. But I've seen a lot of deliveries. I haven't seen any babies who weren't born crying, and I don't really think they were having a great time. Then you have to learn how to walk. You have to learn how to talk. Then you have to go to school, and most likely you're not going to like your teachers. You probably won't like most of your classmates. Then you have to get a job. You probably won't like your boss, and you probably won't even like the job. And throughout all of this, you're getting sick. You're feeling depressed. You get married, but maybe after a while your wife and you won't get along. Maybe you get divorced. Maybe when your kids become teenagers, they'll be rude and abusive. I could tell you a little about that from my own teenagers. Then you get old and sick. And then you die. People spend their entire lives wanting things. They want more food, more money, more sex. Some of them want drugs. Some of them want fame, fortune, power. These are all worldly desires. And yet no matter how much you have, tell the truth. It's never enough. Is there any such thing as enough sex? You men out there know perfectly well there's no such thing as enough sex. Get real. Is there any such thing as enough money? When John D. Rockefeller became the world's first billionaire, it's a well-known fact that was documented by his biographers that he became more paranoid about money than ever. He was afraid people would take his money away, and that's how most people are. So you finally get some money, you win the lottery. Next thing you know, all your friends want a handout. If you give everybody everything they ask for, you'll be poor again. And if you don't, they're going to hate your guts. And then you have to worry about people stealing it. Promoters will come in and slick it away from you. Thieves will come in and just take it. And the biggest thief of all, the IRS, will take everything that's not nailed down. So what kind of happiness is there in money? In fact, what happiness is there in the world? The world is a place of suffering, which is punctuated by occasional happinesses. But it's difficult to be alive in the world. We're made of chemicals, and it's not easy to be a chemical with a soul. It's hard. Now, how long does this go on? The Jewish, Christian, and Muslim religions say it goes on till you die and then you're judged, a permanent judgment. Buddhists say that you come back here, and you keep coming back here. I shouldn't say here necessarily, maybe it's another world like this, but you come back to a world. And many of them believe that it's this very world you keep coming back over and over and over again until you remove the desire that brought you here in the first place, until you break your attachment to money and sex and drugs and power. And remember what I said, it doesn't mean you can't have things that are necessary and beneficial. No one said you can't eat. But desire for food of the sort that Buddha talks about is not the same as being hungry and eating to live. There's something evil about it. It's difficult to understand, and one has to apply oneself. As to how long this goes on, according to the Buddhist point of view, I'll show you a passage to give you an idea. Christians, Jews, and Muslims may say, this is a wimpy religion. We have heaven and hell. Let me show you what the Buddhist hell is. This is a passage from this book, The Teaching of Buddha, that I talked about before. Let's look at this passage. It's about reincarnation. You've all heard that word. That means you die and you come back. Now, it's also called, by the way, transmigration. It means the same thing. The question on the table right now is, how long does this go on? How long do you keep coming back? If one were to pile the ashes and bones of himself burnt in this everlasting transmigration, the pile would be mountains high. If one were to collect the milk of mothers which he suckled during his transmigrations, it would be deeper than the sea. And let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. These are not figures of speech. This is what Buddhism teaches. That you come back so many times, it's beyond reckoning, beyond counting. I mean, imagine a mountain of ashes, all you, just a little bit from each life until it's a Himalayan mountain. It's impossible to even think about. Imagine the milk that you suckled from your mother's breasts filling an ocean. We're talking about millions and billions of lives. So think of it this way. You went to school and got through it. But do you think you can stand to go through it another billion times? You got married, maybe you got divorced. You got over it. Can you do it a billion more times? And Buddha's answer is, you will. You will do it a billion more times until you remove worldly desire. So we better look into how you go about removing worldly desire, just in case this doctrine is true. We don't want to get caught short. By the way, you can't get out of this by killing yourself. In fact, Buddha doesn't even believe in such a thing as death. Oh, there's death of the physical body. But Buddha talks about the fiction of life and death. You don't die. Now, what do we do about this? Buddhism teaches that during your life you acquire something called karma. That's spelled K-A-R-M-A, karma. If you lead a good life, then your karma is good. And when you return, you come back better off than you are now. Until finally, when your transmigrations come to an end, and then you finally attain enlightenment. Now, there are many different sects of Buddhism, but they all have something in common, which is a belief in what's called the Fourfold Noble Truth. Buddha taught the Fourfold Noble Truth. And the four aspects are the fact of suffering, the cause of suffering, what constitutes the end of suffering, and the noble path which leads to the end of suffering. This is the Fourfold Truth. The first part is the fact of suffering. And Buddha teaches that life which is not free of worldly desire always involves distress. So we're back to desire. Remember, Eve had desire, and it got her into trouble. So are we really talking about something different when we talk about Judaism and Buddhism? Maybe it's not as different as we thought. The second thing, what's the cause of suffering? Buddha teaches the cause of human suffering is found in the thirsts of the physical body and in the illusions of worldly passion. Both are rooted in the intense desires of the physical instincts. So there are two aspects of desire: an internal, meaning your physical thirst and your hunger and your sex drive, and then there's an external manifestation of those same desires, where through experience you learn to satisfy your desires by pursuing things in the outside world. And these things can and do become illusions, which become a snare to you, so that you start to believe that unless you get a certain amount of money, you're doomed. And you can ruin your life pursuing that money, and then when you get it, more often than not, you feel worse than you did before. The third aspect of the Fourfold Noble Truth is what constitutes the end of suffering. If desire can be removed, the illusions of worldly passion will die out, and all suffering will come to an end. We're back to desire. And how do you remove these desires? You follow the so-called Eightfold Noble Pathway, which is the pathway to removal of desire, which therefore means it's the pathway to enlightenment. Could it be a pathway back to God? That's something which you have to decide. Look at what the Eightfold Noble Pathway is. You've seen every one of these before, just about. 8 different things that you have to do right. Oops, my numbers are wrong, you'll have to excuse me. Too late to change them now. Right view, right thought, right speech, right behavior. Right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Now, right view means to understand the Fourfold Noble Truth. So there's a bit of circular reasoning here. Removal of desire. Right thought begins with the following: the resolution not to cherish worldly desires. Right speech means basically not to lie, not to speak with double tongues. Right behavior means not to kill, not to steal, and not to commit adultery. Where have I heard that before? Right livelihood means not to live a life which would bring shame. Right effort basically means to do your best all the time, but in the right direction, not to be the best thief you can be. We talked a little about that last week. Right mindfulness means literally to maintain a pure and thoughtful mind. I don't know if you think that's easy. Try it sometime. And right concentration really means that you practice meditation, which we're not going to talk about now because we don't have time. Now, in the West, most people think Buddha was an atheist. Buddha was not really an atheist. Basically, what he was saying can be reduced to this. When mankind fell from grace in the Garden of Eden, he did so by denying God and by buying into worldly desires. Buddha says that when we were in the Garden of Eden in paradise, we were in the presence of God. But by buying into worldly desire, we've removed ourselves from that presence. We did so by accepting desire. And the way out of it is to remove the very same desires. Those who have read the Buddhist scriptures know that Buddha did not deny God. He simply said that we took it upon ourselves to enter the world, that is, the world of desire. We must now take it upon ourselves to remove those desires. The question of whether God exists and what his nature is was addressed by Buddha in the form of a parable. Buddha clearly acknowledges the existence of a higher force in this parable. And here's how it goes. Suppose a man were pierced by a poisoned arrow, and his relatives and friends got together to call a surgeon to have the arrow pulled out and the wound treated. If the wounded man objects, saying, "Wait a little, before you pull it out, I want to know who shot this arrow. Was it a man or a woman? Was it someone of noble birth, or was it a peasant? What was the bow made of? Was it a big bow or a small bow that shot the arrow? Was it made of wood or bamboo? What was the bowstring made of? Was it made of fiber or of gut? Was the arrow made of rattan or of reed? What feathers were used?" And then the man says, "Before you extract the arrow, I want to know all about these things." Then what will happen? Before all this information can be secured, no doubt, the poison will have time to circulate all through the system, and the man may die. The first duty is to remove the arrow and prevent its poison from spreading. In the presence of misery, sorrow, suffering, and agony, one should first search for a way to solve these problems and devote oneself to the practice of that way. In this parable, there is a higher force which shot this poison arrow. And that higher force clearly is God. But Buddha doesn't speculate about the nature of God. He says that man has been afflicted with a poison arrow of worldly desire. And we bought into that desire ourselves, willingly, in the Garden of Eden, when Eve ate from that tree and her husband ate after her. This is the link between God and enlightenment. It would appear that one completely removes worldly desire, one is restored to the presence of God. And that's all the time we're going to have for today. Please tune in next week when we're going to talk about murder, abortion, and birth control. Thank you and goodbye.
Focus on the one thing that I'm sure of. Baby, wouldn't it be nice if we both spoke the same language? I could understand your troubles and you know mine, and we could be together all the time if we both spoke the same language. If we both spoke the same language. If we both spoke the same